Harper arrived beneath the towering spires of Skyhaven residences just as dusk fell. The taxi's soft purr faded behind them, leaving only the hush of tires gliding on wet streets and the distant hush of the river. The evening sky was a canvas of soft, bruise-colored clouds stretched thin over the city's restless pulse. Skyhaven loomed above, a vertical sanctuary of steel and glass. Its windows already glimmered like stars, pinned to the facade, defiant against the approaching night. Harper paused at the curb, fingers tracing the brass key in their coat pocket. Smooth-edged, cold, a relic from another life. It had slipped from the back pages of their late father's star atlas just that morning, a quiet surprise amid the disarray of moving boxes and old books. The lobby doors parted before them with a discreet sigh. Inside, a cocoon of warmth embraced them. The marble underfoot was a polished sea of slate and pearl, muted reflections rippling with each step Harper took. The scent of sandalwood lingered, blending with something faintly botanical, a fragrance the building must have chosen carefully, designed to calm the city-worn senses. Behind the reception desk, the attendant gave a polite nod, but did not speak. They rarely did at Skyhaven. That was the point. Harper moved deeper into the lobby. Their footsteps fell away into silence as the glass doors sealed shut behind them, pressing out the street's anxious breath. The hush was almost cathedral-like. Ceiling-high panels of onyx framed an arrangement of indoor birches, their white trunks reaching upward beneath a sculpted chandelier. Above, gentle pendant lights cast a soft radiance, as though the ceiling itself diffused moonlight. The weight of the day began to dissolve, not all at once, but in small, steady fragments. The morning conference call that had run long, the cracked screen of their phone, the awkward condolences from neighbors still unfamiliar with grief's intricate silence. Harper's father had been distant for years, orbiting observatories and lecture halls far from the city. Yet his passing had unfolded a hollow that even this luxurious retreat could not fully mask. They moved toward the elevators. Above the brushed steel doors, the floor indicator pulsed a tranquil blue. As Harper pressed the call button, a breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding eased from their lungs. The elevator arrived soundlessly. Its doors parted to reveal an interior paneled in pale maple, the grain running like the gentle rings of old trees. Step by step, Harper entered, feeling the shift as the outside world surrendered. The elevator was not just a capsule of transit. It was a vessel between realms. The doors whispered shut. Harper stood still, alone. Their reflections stared back from the polished metal trim. A figure suspended in the amber hush, dark coat dusted from the earlier rain, eyes shadowed from sleep's scarcity. No one here but themselves, and the key in their pocket, pressing lightly against their thigh. They reached for the control panel and paused. The number 47 glowed softly at their fingertips' touch. The ascent began. At first, there was a faint sensation of upward movement, a gentle pull at the soles of their feet as the city's ground floor receded. Lights from the lobby blurred into pale gold smears before vanishing altogether. Within the quiet capsule, time seemed to loosen. Harper watched the digital floor numbers tick upward in slow, steady increments. 2, 9, 16. The gentle hum of the motor became a kind of lullaby, steady and hypnotic. Harper's hand moved to the brass key again. They hadn't meant to bring it. It had slipped into the pocket absent-mindedly, a stowaway from the earlier hours when unpacking had felt like archaeology, digging through layers of someone else's choices, tracing constellations mapped by the past. The key was ornate, heavier than it appeared, not a modern piece. Its head was etched with a pattern Harper hadn't recognized at first. Upon closer inspection, it resembled a stylized quadrant of the night sky, a circle divided, small stars engraved along the edges. It had been tucked inside the back flap of the star atlas, between notes scrawled in the looping, precise hand of their father. A hand they had not seen writing in years. Tycho Project, one page had read. Quadrant missing. Return to Skyhaven. Harper had puzzled over the message for hours. There was no Tycho Project they knew of, and as for Skyhaven, it seemed unlikely the building itself was referenced. Yet here they were. 31, 36, 42. The elevator glided upward, the mechanical sound softer now as the floors increased, the weight of the earth easing. At this height, the city's clamor was already becoming a memory. Below, the avenues stretched like silent capillaries of light, tracing the pulse of the metropolis. As the floor indicator blinked 47, the ascent slowed, a final, gentle sigh of hydraulics. The doors slipped open. Harper stepped out into the hallway. The corridor extended like a river beneath subdued, recessed lighting. Plush, gray carpet absorbed the sound of their steps. Abstract paintings adorned the walls, pieces chosen to evoke calm, distant horizons. Past residents, past stories, all folded into this quiet corridor where no history was openly spoken. To the left, their new home waited. Apartment 4712. Harper reached into their coat pocket, pulling out the modern fob the leasing agent had provided. The brass key, cool in their other hand, felt almost out of place against the slick plastic rectangle. Yet they could not bring themselves to leave it behind. They approached the door. For a moment, they lingered, sensing the breath of the apartment beyond, the unknown space that would, in time, absorb their routines, their sleep, their quietest hours. Harper pressed the fob against the sensor. A soft, accepting click sounded. The door swung inward on silent hinges. Harper crossed the threshold. The condo exhaled a cool, clean scent. New paint mingled faintly with cedar from the movers' boxes stacked in orderly clusters against one wall. Outside the tall windows, twilight had deepened to indigo, brushed with the fading warmth of the sun's last touch. The river was a slick ribbon beyond the glass, cradling the city's reflection in its currents. Inside, the apartment's design was understated but meticulous. Pale oak floors stretched unbroken from the doorway to the living area. A low-profile sofa sat angled toward the windows. The kitchen's marble island gleamed beneath the recessed lights Harper had left dimmed when they'd first toured the space. They set the brass key on the small tray by the door, where the fob now rested, a juxtaposition of past and present. For a long moment, they stood without moving, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant sigh of wind against the window panes. A single moving box sat apart from the others, not by choice. The movers had set it down where Harper had directed, near the dining table that remained bare but for a shallow ceramic bowl waiting for fruit that had yet to be bought. The box was an old pine crate. Faded stencils spelled out a name in blocky letters, Tycho Project. Harper approached it slowly, a strange tightness in their chest. This was not just another parcel of books or kitchenware. They had found the crate wedged in the corner of their old apartment storage room, long untouched. It had been theirs once, back when university life was filled with late nights and coffee-ringed astronomy textbooks. But the crate had disappeared when their father left for what was supposed to be a short lecture tour in Europe, a tour that stretched into years. Harper crouched beside the crate. The lid was already loosened from earlier that afternoon. They slid it aside gently, as though not to wake whatever memories lay inside. The star atlas rested atop a few rolled charts and a leather-bound journal. The journal's spine was cracked, the edges feathered from years of thumbing. Beside it sat a sealed envelope, vellum, heavy with wax. The seal bore the same quadrant motif as the brass key, Tycho Project. The name had seemed academic once, remote, a placeholder for a thesis that never fully formed. But now, with the key and the atlas reunited beneath the sky their father had spent decades deciphering, the phrase took on the weight of something larger. Harper reached into the crate and lifted the atlas carefully. Its cover was embossed with silver foil stars, dulled now by time. When they opened it, the pages crackled softly. Handwritten annotations spiraled through the margins, full of diagrams and half-thought calculations. The back flap where the key had rested lay empty now. Harper's thumb brushed the indentation it had left in the paper. The journal tempted, but not yet. Something in Harper resisted the dive into whatever message their father might have left. The atlas felt safer, objective, structured, a known map of the heavens. They carried it to the dining table and spread it open beneath the pendant light's glow. The most recent chart was a sketched-out view of the northern sky. It showed the standard constellations, Cassiopeia, Cygnus, Draco. But in the lower quadrant, space yawned empty. No stars marked the void. Instead, in the corner, their father had inked a note in small, deliberate script. Quadrant missing. Completion possible only at Skyhaven. Harper read the words twice, pulse quickening. The coincidence was too perfect. Skyhaven, the building they had moved into only weeks after their father's passing. A choice made for proximity to work, for the solitude the upper floors offered. Not because of any deliberate alignment with a cryptic chart. Yet here it was, and the brass key, and the crate, each piece orbiting toward the others as if drawn by unseen gravity. A movement outside the window caught Harper's eye. They turned toward the glass. Night had now fully claimed the skyline. The river held the dark like a mirror, interrupted only by the gentle ripple of boat wakes and the distant gleam of street lights. High above, clouds parted briefly, revealing a deep stretch of stars rarely visible this close to the urban core. Harper's breath steadied. From this height, the city seemed subdued, almost reverent, as though it too waited. Then a flicker of light, not from the street or the river, but higher, near the rooftop garden. A gentle pulse, faint but deliberate, like the glimmer of a signal lantern in the mist. Harper's brow furrowed. The rooftop was supposed to be unlit after hours. The brochure had described it as a residence retreat, open by day, left to the quiet of the night to protect the plant's circadian rhythms. But the light had flared unmistakably. Once, then gone. A pull stirred in Harper's chest, the same instinct that had led them to keep the brass key close, the same impulse that had compelled them to unpack the crate before any of the other boxes. They glanced back at the journal and the envelope, but left them untouched. Not yet. Instead, they moved to the coat rack, shrugging into a light jacket. The fabric was soft and broken in, a familiar armor against the cool night. Their fingers brushed the tray by the door, hesitating over the key. But no, the rooftop needed only the fob for access, or so the leasing agent had assured them. Still, Harper slipped the brass key back into their pocket. It felt heavier than before. They stepped back into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind them. The corridor was silent, unchanged. Abstract paintings on the walls still offered serene, distant horizons. But the atmosphere had shifted. The stillness was no longer merely peaceful. It carried the sense of something held in suspension, a threshold. Harper moved toward the elevator. The call button glowed under their touch. A few floors above, the light had come from the rooftop garden, the sanctuary the leasing agent had praised for its curated greenery, its secluded seating, and its panoramic views. Harper had admired it in daylight, but at night, they had never gone. The elevator arrived with a muted chime. As the doors whispered open, Harper felt a faint stirring of anticipation, like the hush that precedes the overture in a darkened theater, like the pause between the rising of the moon and the soft emergence of stars. They stepped inside. The doors closed with a soft sigh. Harper pressed the button marked R. The rooftop level. As the elevator began to rise, a gentle sensation returned. The upward pull, the easing of gravity. The numbers above the door advanced one by one. 48, 49, 50. The city dropped away again. The crate, the atlas, the journal, all receded into the apartment below. What remained was the present moment, the movement skyward, the brass key warm in their pocket, and the single question unfurling softly beneath the hum of the elevator's climb. What had their father left behind? The ascent continued. The elevator slowed. The hum softened to a hush. Harper's reflection lingered faintly in the polished paneling, dim now, shaped by the gentle overhead light. A figure in transition, poised between the ordinary and something not yet named. The floor indicator blinked once. R. The rooftop. The doors whispered open. Cool air flowed inward, scented with damp earth, and the sharp green of leaves turned dark by night. Harper stepped forward. The threshold felt like crossing into another world. The rooftop garden stretched wide, softened by shadow and silvered moonlight. Planters shaped like crescent moons lined the perimeter, their edges blurred by draping vines and tall grasses that rustled in the night breeze. Lanterns, small and amber, hung from curved iron posts. They were meant to resemble fireflies, the leasing agent had said. Most remained dark, conserving power and protecting the plant's rhythms. R. The rooftop, but one still glowed. To Harper's left, halfway down the stone pathway that curved between the planters, a single lantern cast a low, steady light. Not the flicker of a forgotten bulb, but something deliberate, measured. It reflected against the polished surface of a bench nearby and shimmered faintly in a puddle where earlier rain had gathered. The rooftop felt vast and empty, but not abandoned. Harper took a step forward. The soles of their boots brushed over smooth stone, the quiet sound nearly lost beneath the whisper of the night wind. Beyond the safety glass barrier that ringed the terrace, the skyline pulsed in muted constellations of amber and white. the city had become an ocean of lights. Harper moved toward the glowing lantern. Their breath was steady, but each exhale seemed to linger in the cool air longer than it should. Somewhere overhead, the slow sweep of a plane's lights moved across the sky, impossibly high, a silver thread tracing a path beyond reach. They paused beside the bench. The lantern's light fell across the nearby planters. Lavender stems stirred gently. A faint sweetness mingled with the cooler scent of wet stone. Harper let their gaze travel beyond the planted beds, following the curves of the path deeper into the garden's heart. That's when they saw it. A pulse of movement low to the ground, pale like silver mercury. At first, Harper thought it was the reflection of the distant skyscraper lights dancing in the puddles. But it moved against the light, not with it. A cat. Slender, long-legged, with a coat as pale as the moon's halo. Its eyes gleamed silver, not the green or amber of city strays. Silver, keen, and steady. It regarded Harper without fear. The cat's tail curled once, deliberate. Then it turned and padded away down the path, vanishing behind a stand of tall grasses. The brush of its passage left a slight ripple in the quiet, like the wake of a boat across still water. Harper followed, not hurried, just drawn. The path curved past low benches, and a closed sunshade folded like a sleeping sail. Overhead, clouds parted just enough to reveal a scatter of stars. The same quadrant from the atlas Harper noticed absently, the one marked incomplete. The blank space still lingered in memory, an absence waiting to be filled. The cat reappeared ahead. It sat beside a narrow iron gate, half concealed by an arch of ivy and jasmine. The scent sharpened as Harper approached. Night-blooming jasmine, potent and sweet. The kind their father had once kept in pots on a narrow balcony in a different building, a different life. The gate was locked. Its metalwork traced an old pattern, circles intersecting, quartered by lines. Harper's breath caught. The brass keys design. Without thinking, Harper reached into their pocket. The key was cold again, as if the climb had drawn the warmth from it. They fitted it into the lock. The fit was perfect. A subtle click. The latch released. The cat rose and slipped through the opening as the gate swung inward. Beyond lay a smaller, more private garden space. Raised beds framed a clearing where the ground was covered in gravel and slate. In the center stood a greenhouse, not a large one, modest, worn at the corners. Its panes rippled faintly in the breeze, reflecting the city's fractured light. Harper crossed the threshold. The door to the greenhouse was slightly ajar. Warmth breathed out, a humid, fragrant exhale of soil and leaf. Shadows stirred inside, not threatening, intentional, measured. A figure straightened from between the rows of potted vines and herbs, older, compact in stature. Gray hair gathered back loosely. Their hands were clad in thin gloves dusted with soil. They held a small pair of pruning shears at their side, blade catching a glimmer of lantern light. They regarded Harper without surprise. The cat padded to the figure's side and circled their ankles. Harper's voice felt caught in their throat. The figure lifted a hand, not in greeting, not in warning, simply in acknowledgement. A gesture that spoke of patience, of expectation fulfilled. Silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The greenhouse hummed faintly, the low, living sound of leaves brushing glass and the steady breath of the city beyond. A strand of night air swirled past, stirring the scent of damp earth and crushed rosemary. The lantern light seemed to pulse softly, synchronizing with Harper's slow inhale. The key rested warm now in their palm. Behind them, the rooftop's expanse lay dark and silent. Before them, the greenhouse stood illuminated from within, a quiet sanctum beneath the sky. The figure's eyes, calm, lined, perceptive, held Harper steady, as if measuring time by breath instead of hours. Harper exhaled. The cat watched with unblinking silver eyes. Somewhere above, the first wisps of high-altitude clouds moved like ghost ships across the stars. Harper stepped fully inside. Harper stepped over the threshold. The greenhouse door whispered shut behind them, settling back into its frame like a sigh. Inside, the air was warmer than expected, not stifling, but rich with the scent of damp soil, rosemary, and the sharp, lemony tang of verbena. Overhead, the glass panes stretched upward in shallow arches, some fogged with condensation, others clear. The skyline shimmered faintly through them, fractured into slivers by the greenhouse's steel ribs. The figure, the gardener, set the shears down beside a shallow tray of dark, loamy earth. They pulled off their gloves slowly, fingers flexing, and placed them on a low bench. Without a word, they moved to a small wooden counter near the far wall. An electric kettle sat ready. As it clicked on, a soft, almost domestic sound in the hush, Harper felt the tension in their shoulders ease slightly. The cat had curled itself neatly by the gardener's feet, silver eyes half-lidded. The greenhouse seemed much larger from within than it had appeared outside. Rows of plants filled the space with soft green shadows. Herbs, trailing vines, and flowering shrubs whose blossoms glowed faintly in the lamplight. Night-blooming jasmine cascaded down a trellis, its perfume thick and sweet. In the far corner, an old telescope rested on a wheeled platform, half-shrouded by a linen cloth. The gardener moved with a grace born of routine. They lifted 2 ceramic mugs from a shelf and spooned loose tea into a small mesh infuser. The scent of chamomile and mint rose with the first hiss of boiling water. Harper remained where they stood, uncertain if to sit or remain standing. The gardener glanced over, eyes dark but not unkind. A slight nod, permission. Harper sank onto the low bench near the planter beds. The wood was cool beneath their palms. Their breath synced slowly with the greenhouse's quiet rhythm. The faint creak of wood settling, the delicate rustle of leaves swaying against glass, and the occasional muted groan of the building itself as it shifted against the night wind. The gardener approached and handed over a mug. The ceramic was smooth, warm. Harper wrapped their fingers around it, letting the heat seep into chilled skin. No words passed between them. None seemed necessary. They sat in companionable silence as the city unfolded beyond the glass walls. The sky had deepened from indigo to near black, but the horizon still held the last breath of daylight, a thin line of rose fading into copper where the river met the skyline. Lights blinked on in the towers opposite. Window by window, the city brightened, not as a garish blaze, but as a soft constellation. Harper traced the reflections along the glass. The constellations on the skyline mirrored those from the atlas. The thought came unbidden. The atlas, still spread open back in the condo, the blank quadrant awaiting meaning. They felt the brass key press lightly against their thigh, a reminder of the path that had led here. As they sipped the tea, its warmth unfurled through their chest. The herbaceous sweetness was grounding. A breath steadied. The day's fatigue, the strain of sorting boxes, the ache behind the eyes from sleepless nights, began to dissipate. The gardener broke the silence at last. Their voice was low, softened by age, but not fragile. "Tycho," they said, almost to themselves, "it's been a long time." The name echoed through Harper's thoughts, pulling threads together. The crate, the atlas, the journal, the quadrant missing. And now, spoken aloud by a stranger who seemed anything but a stranger. Harper's gaze sharpened, but the gardener did not elaborate. Instead, they stood and moved toward a wide potting table at the greenhouse's center. They brushed soil from a narrow wooden stool and beckoned slightly. Harper followed. The gardener reached beneath the table and pulled out a small stack of papers secured in a weathered leather folio. They laid it open. The top sheet was an old lecture flyer, edges curled, the ink faded but legible. Garden of Stars, a public lecture by Dr. Elias Morin. Harper's breath caught. Their father's name. Below, in smaller print, curated in collaboration with Miko Takahara, lead archivist, City Observatory. Miko, the gardener. The revelation was quiet but seismic. Harper felt the threads tighten. This was not coincidence. The gardener, Miko, had known their father, had curated his work, and had kept something alive here in this rooftop garden, waiting. Miko turned a page in the folio, revealing a sketched map of constellations. The design was familiar, yet incomplete. It matched the quadrant from the atlas almost precisely, except that one segment remained blank, an empty space where something new should bloom. Harper felt the weight of the moment settle into their bones. They opened their mouth to speak, but the words dissolved before they could form. Instead, they turned toward the windows. Beyond the greenhouse glass, the copper glow had surrendered to night fully. The river was a ribbon of moving lights, boats drifting in slow procession beneath the bridges. Towers shimmered in the dark, the hum of traffic below reduced to a distant, soothing murmur. In the sky above, clouds parted briefly, revealing a clear expanse. Stars pierced the darkness. Harper traced them with their eyes, the familiar figures of Orion's belt, the arc of the Big Dipper, and the pale cluster of the Pleiades. But their gaze returned again and again to the empty quadrant, as if the heavens themselves were waiting for the missing fragment. The tea cooled in Harper's hands. The cat stirred, rising to its feet, silver eyes gleaming. It padded silently toward the covered telescope and placed one paw against the cloth as though calling attention to it. Harper's pulse quickened. Miko followed the cat's movement with a knowing glance. "Not tonight," Miko said softly, voice almost lost in the rustle of leaves. "But soon." Then they gathered the papers back into the folio and set them aside, fingers lingering on the worn leather as if grounding themselves in the past before letting it rest. Harper stood. The greenhouse seemed different now, no longer just a private retreat among plants, but a threshold. A place where fragments of past and present converged, not by chance, but by quiet, deliberate design. Outside, the stars continued their slow arc over the sleeping city. Harper's hand brushed the brass key in their pocket once more, the cool metal steady against their palm. The missing quadrant was not just a chart to be filled, it was an invitation. The cat watched Harper steadily as if to say, "It's time." The stillness inside the greenhouse was total for a moment. Even the breeze outside seemed to hush, the plants pausing their quiet rustle as though the room itself had taken a breath and held it. Miko rested one hand on the folio, fingers brushing the aged leather, but said nothing further. The gardener's eyes did not press Harper for answers. No questions, only quiet expectation, as if this unfolding was a long-anticipated tide returning to shore. Harper nodded once, more to themselves than to Miko, and turned back toward the door. The cat slipped through ahead, pale fur nearly glowing in the dim lantern light. Crossing the threshold, Harper felt again that shift of air, the coolness of the open night compared to the greenhouse's warm, earthy breath. The door eased closed behind them. The key rested with its familiar weight in their pocket, its cool metal grounding against the warmth that lingered in their palm from the mug of tea. The rooftop stretched silent under the sweep of the stars. Lanterns remained dark now, as though their earlier signal had fulfilled its purpose. The sky had deepened further into a rich, velvet black, pin-pricked with stars that shone steadily despite the city's soft, persistent glow. The skyline held its quiet blaze, buildings standing like monuments to a world busy with movement far below. But up here, that world felt distant. Harper moved toward the elevator without hurry. Each step felt intentional, the kind of movement made by someone tracing a known path, though they had never walked it before. The elevator doors parted with their customary whisper. The cabin inside felt different now, not just a box of brushed steel and polished maple, but a familiar vessel, a place where moments of transition crystallized, where thoughts gathered momentum. Harper stepped inside and pressed the button for the 47th floor. The doors closed, sealing away the rooftop garden and its quiet revelations. As the lift descended, Harper's hand moved to the key again, fingers brushing its grooves. The quadrant design now pulsed with meaning. It was not just a relic. It was a map, a guide between layers of time and space, the spaces their father had charted not just in the stars above, but in the spaces between people, between past and present. The elevator sighed to a halt. Harper crossed the hallway swiftly, the soft carpeting swallowing their footsteps. Their apartment door accepted the key fob's touch with a quiet click. Inside, the room welcomed them with its soft, ambient glow. The automatic lights had dimmed to a warm, low amber, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor and up the smooth walls. The crate sat as they had left it, open beside the dining table. The atlas still lay spread wide, the blank quadrant a silent invitation. Harper moved first to the journal. The leather was cool under their fingers. When they lifted it, the spine flexed with a soft creak. A familiar sound. A sound that once, long ago, had meant long nights of study at their father's desk. Pages filled with notes, diagrams, musings written in the careful script that Harper had inherited but never quite mastered. But the journal was more than a collection of thoughts. It was a breadcrumb trail. Beneath the journal lay the sealed vellum envelope. The wax seal bore the same quadrant design. The circle divided, the small stars at each corner. Harper turned it over in their hands. The envelope was heavier than expected. Something more than paper rested inside. They hesitated. Opening it here, alone, felt wrong. The garden was where it belonged now. The rooftop, the greenhouse, the observatory waiting behind Miko's quiet gaze. The cat had led them there once already. they would return. Carefully, Harper gathered the atlas, the journal, and the envelope into a messenger bag resting nearby. The weight of the items was solid, but not burdensome, like the heft of purpose settling onto their shoulders. Before leaving, Harper crossed to the wide windows. The city spread outward in rivers of light. Moving points traced the bridges, cars flowing steadily like lifeblood through capillaries of glass and stone. Beyond the river, the opposing skyline glittered, mirrored in the dark water. The boat lights traced slow, deliberate arcs beneath the towers. But above was where Harper's gaze lingered. The quadrant from the atlas stretched wide in the heavens. The familiar constellations stood in their eternal watch. But the blank space, that fertile absence, held the possibility of something new. Harper pressed their palm gently against the cool glass. The pane vibrated faintly with the whisper of the night wind. Completion possible only at Skyhaven. The message from the atlas circled back, steady and insistent. The sky did not rush. The stars moved in their measured pace, invisible to the eye, but certain in their passage. Harper turned from the window. They slipped into their jacket again, shoulders straightening. The messenger bag settled comfortably at their side. As they approached the door, the brass key found its place once more in their pocket. The fob clicked quietly against it, the present brushing against the past. The door shut behind them with the same soft finality as before. The corridor stretched ahead, unchanged in appearance but altered in meaning. The abstract paintings on the walls no longer seemed arbitrary. They resembled, in their way, segments of sky, horizons, layers. The elevator awaited. Harper pressed the call button firmly. When the doors opened, the air inside felt warmer than it had earlier, as though it had retained the memory of their previous ascent. The small cabin no longer felt clinical or impersonal. It was a familiar companion in this quiet pilgrimage. Harper pressed R. The climb began. Outside the small windows, the city peeled away floor by floor. Not a retreat, but a widening. Each level shed more of the day's burdens. Each light passed was a door closing behind them. Higher. The rooftop was not just a destination now. It was a threshold, a gateway. As the elevator neared the top, the hum of the motor steadied into a soothing rhythm, almost like the deep breathing they had learned to focus on during sleepless nights. The messenger bag rested against Harper's hip. The journal, the atlas, and the sealed envelope pressed together inside. The missing quadrant waited above. The elevator eased to a stop. A soft chime. The doors parted. The rooftop garden stretched outward, silent and patient beneath the stars. The night air embraced Harper as they stepped out of the elevator. The rooftop had deepened into stillness. The earlier breeze had settled into a cool hush, and the hum of distant traffic was softened into a low murmur beneath the steady pulse of the city's heart. Above, the stars kept their vigil, the river of light running steady through the darkened sky. The lanterns remained unlit, but the path was clear beneath Harper's feet. The familiar crescent moon planters stood like silent sentinels along the way. Faint silver traces shimmered where droplets from the afternoon's rain still clung to the leaves and stone. Harper moved forward without hesitation. The weight of the messenger bag was a comforting presence at their side. The journal, the atlas, the sealed envelope, each piece a note in the quiet symphony of the night's purpose. The greenhouse door came into view, its frame outlined softly against the silver blue of the sky beyond. Through the rippled glass, the gentle glow of lamplight flickered, diffused by the condensation that had gathered in delicate patterns across the panes. The cat was waiting at the threshold. Its pale fur caught the moonlight, silver eyes reflecting the constellations above. It did not move to greet Harper this time. Instead, it simply watched, still and expectant, as though it had always known they would return. The greenhouse door was not latched. It swung open easily beneath Harper's hand. Warm air spilled out, rich with the scents of damp soil, rosemary, and jasmine. A deeper note lingered beneath, earth warmed by the day's sun, cooling now into night. Inside, the space had not changed, yet it felt altered. The rows of plants stood like quiet witnesses along the narrow aisles. The trellised jasmine brushed softly against the glass with each slow movement of the breeze. At the central table, Miko looked up from a shallow tray of seedlings. They were arranging tiny markers into the soil, but when they saw Harper, their hands paused. The shadowed lines of their face softened. No words. Only a nod. Harper returned the gesture, slipping the messenger bag from their shoulder and setting it carefully on the table's edge. The cat leapt up in a single graceful movement and sat beside it, tail curled around its paws. Miko wiped soil from their palms with a cloth and stepped back, giving Harper space. The gardener's eyes moved to the bag, then back to Harper's face, not questioning, only waiting. Harper unfastened the bag. The journal came out first. Miko's gaze lingered on it, but did not waver. Next, the atlas, its edges slightly worn from years of handling. Harper unfolded it fully on the tabletop, smoothing the pages until the incomplete quadrant lay exposed beneath the overhead lamp's glow. The sealed envelope rested last in Harper's hand. The wax seal caught the light, its quadrant design reflecting faintly. Harper hesitated, thumb brushing the ridged edges of the seal. Miko spoke softly, voice roughened by the years but steady. He left it for this moment. It wasn't a question. Harper nodded. The wax cracked softly beneath Harper's thumb. The envelope opened. Inside rested two objects, a folded sheet of vellum and a small glass vial. Harper unfolded the vellum first. It bore a sketch diagram, an extension of the quadrant map, lines plotted with precise coordinates. But where the chart ended, a flowing script curved beneath. Garden of Stars, Skyhaven Bloom. The vial held seeds, tiny, pale, and faintly luminous. Under the lamplight, they glimmered softly, as though they held within them fragments of starlight itself. Harper's breath slowed. Miko reached forward, taking the vellum gently, eyes scanning the familiar script. Their thumb brushed the lower corner where the signature rested, Elias Morin. He dreamed of something living. Miko's voice was almost a whisper. Not just a chart, a constellation to grow. Harper placed the vial beside the atlas. The two stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of what lay before them settling like a gentle cloak over the greenhouse. The soft rustle of the plants seemed to swell and quiet in rhythm with their breath. The cat moved to the edge of the table, eyes fixed on the planter beds beyond. Harper followed its gaze. A wide, shallow planter sat at the center of the greenhouse floor, empty, its soil rich and dark beneath a fine layer of moss. Harper lifted the vial. The glass was cool, the seeds inside shifting with the smallest movement. They approached the planter, feeling the stillness of the space draw closer around them. The air seemed to hum with quiet expectation. Kneeling, Harper pressed their fingers into the earth. The soil gave easily, moist and warm. One by one, they placed the seeds into the shallow furrows. Each seed disappeared into the dark, like stars vanishing beyond the horizon, not lost, but hidden until the moment of return. When the last was placed, Harper brushed the soil gently over the top, palms flat against the earth. A breath, slow, steady. Miko joined them, kneeling opposite. Together, they pressed their hands into the soil, grounding the moment into the living earth. The cat circled the planter once, tail high, before sitting quietly beside it. Above, clouds moved in slow procession across the night sky. The stars beyond the greenhouse glass remained steady, silent witnesses. He called them the Skyhaven Bloom. Miko's voice was quiet, almost reverent. The missing quadrant, a living constellation. Harper closed their eyes briefly, letting the meaning settle. The weight of loss had been heavy, but now it shifted, not diminished, transformed. The ache of absence now held within it a pulse of purpose. They rose, brushing soil from their hands. Miko followed suit. The journal, the atlas, and the vellum remained open on the table. The seeds were in the earth. And above, through the parted clouds, the blank quadrant held its patient, waiting breath. The stars did not hurry, neither would they. A breeze stirred the greenhouse. It whispered through the jasmine, coaxing petals to release their sweetness into the warm, earthy air. The leaves rustled in quiet conversation against the glass. The breath of the night returned, not the gusts of the day, but a steady, patient current. The cat's ears twitched toward the far corner. Harper followed the movement instinctively. Miko had already turned, eyes resting on the telescope beneath its linen cover. The folds of fabric rippled faintly in the draft, as though the instrument itself was inhaling. No words passed between them. The telescope stood on a wheeled platform, its base aged brass, and the long tube painted a deep green gone pale with time. Harper approached slowly. They curled fingers into the linen and lifted the cloth away. The fabric fell in soft waves to the floor. The telescope emerged fully, solid, weathered, timeless. A survivor from another era. Its mount had been polished smooth by years of adjustments. The eyepiece gleamed faintly under the overhead lamp. Harper ran a hand along the metal. Cool, steady. "My father's," they murmured, though the words were scarcely more than breath. Miko nodded once. It waited. The cat leapt gracefully onto the base of the telescope and sat, tail draped elegantly along the curve of the platform. Harper gripped the frame and gently rolled the instrument toward the sliding glass doors that led to the open deck adjoining the greenhouse. Miko followed, their steps soundless on the stone floor. The doors parted smoothly, and cool air flowed in to mingle with the greenhouse's warmth. Outside, the rooftop deck stretched wide. The crescent planters encircled the space, and beyond them, the skyline glittered, a sea of towers rising into the dark. Above, the sky had opened. Clouds had drifted eastward, revealing a clear, deep vault of stars. The familiar constellations anchored the scene, Orion poised in the southern sky, Cassiopeia's W curving near the zenith. The moon had not yet risen, leaving the stars to blaze in quiet sovereignty. But Harper's eyes, even without the atlas, found the empty quadrant, the space in the sky that had waited, the space their father had named Garden of Stars. Harper adjusted the telescope, aligning the mount carefully. The wheels moved easily, as though the telescope had longed for this return to purpose. The instrument was old, but the balance held true. As it tilted skyward, the eyepiece framed the blank quadrant. Miko stood beside Harper, silent, hands folded before them. The cat sat at Harper's feet now, head tipped back, eyes reflecting the starlight. Harper bent to the eyepiece and closed one eye. The blackness inside the telescope's view was not empty. It was a canvas where light and meaning could emerge. Stars, scattered, isolated pinpoints. No familiar shapes connected them, no mythological figures, just the raw, untamed sprawl of the sky's lesser-known reaches. But then, toward the edge, a faint smear of movement. Harper's breath caught. Not a star, not a planet. A pale green arc moved steadily across the field of view. A comet, slow, deliberate in its ancient orbit. "It's real," Harper whispered. "It always was," Miko replied, voice soft as the breeze. Harper leaned back, lifting their gaze from the telescope to the sky above. There, visible even without the lens, the comet traced its path across the blank quadrant. A slow traveler, luminous green against the dark. Its tail streamed like a brushstroke, drawn by the hand of time itself. "He knew," Harper said. Miko nodded. He hoped. The breeze shifted, cooler now. A mist had begun to rise from the river far below. It crept up between the towers, softening the sharp lines of the city into silhouettes. The skyline transformed into a series of islands adrift on a silver sea. Harper stood in the center of it all, the sky above, the seeds planted in the earth behind them, the city breathing steadily below. The comet's path would not last. It would continue its silent journey, vanishing into the void until its next return decades hence. But the seeds were here now, living fragments, the beginning of a new constellation, not in the sky, but in the garden, in the soil, in the spaces their father had charted with ink and patience. Harper lowered the telescope gently. The comet's passage was steady. There was no need to chase it. "Soon," Miko said, as if reading the thought. "We'll align the chart. The quadrant will bloom." Harper nodded. Behind them, the greenhouse glowed softly. The planted seeds lay undisturbed, the soil dark and rich beneath the lamplight. The cat had returned to the doorway, watching, eyes bright. The river mist reached the rooftop, curling around the planters. The city's lights fractured and danced in the shifting veil. Harper closed their eyes briefly, inhaling the scents of soil, jasmine, and the cooling night. The ache of absence eased, not erased, but changed. Grief's weight had become gravity, holding them steady in the orbit of something larger. Above, the comet moved on, not an ending, a crossing. Harper exhaled slowly. The story was only beginning. The wind shifted again, cool and carrying the faint metallic scent of impending rain. Harper lifted their gaze to the sky. High clouds had begun to creep back over the stars, veiling the comet's luminous arc. The empty quadrant would soon disappear beneath a curtain of gray, but the knowing of its presence remained, fixed now not only in the sky, but in the soil, the chart, and the breath between two people and a waiting cat. Miko placed a gentle hand on the telescope's mount. Without a word, Harper moved to the opposite side. Together, they guided the antique instrument back toward the greenhouse. Its wheels rolled smoothly over the damp stone, the base vibrating softly beneath their fingers. The cat trotted ahead, tail lifted like a slender flag. Beyond the glass barrier that circled the rooftop garden, the city seemed to pulse with slow, muted light. The river reflected the towers in blurred ribbons, motion slowed to a dreamlike crawl. They wheeled the telescope inside. The door eased closed behind them with a click that felt more like a heartbeat than a sound. Harper brushed moisture from their sleeves. The cool damp gathered from the night air. The cat circled the central planter once, then leapt gracefully onto the work table beside the atlas and journal. It sat, eyes steady, a living marker between the past and the yet to come. Miko moved to the small alcove that jutted from the greenhouse's north side, a space Harper hadn't explored before. It was framed by taller glass panels curved inward, a design borrowed from old-world observatories. In the center stood a low, circular table. Surrounding it were 3 wide chairs, deep cushioned, their fabric softened by age and care. Bookshelves lined the alcove's rear wall, their contents a quiet sea of spines, star charts, botany texts, journals, some titles in English, others in languages Harper could not read. The alcove was not just an observatory, it was a library, a sanctuary. As Harper approached, a soft whistle curled through the greenhouse. The kettle. Miko retrieved it, pouring water into a ceramic teapot where fresh sprigs of lemon balm and mint floated. The scent lifted into the warm air, mingling with the perfume of the jasmine. Harper sank into one of the chairs. The cushion gave beneath them with a gentle sigh. The ache in their shoulders, the low, persistent ache that had settled there through months of grief, restless nights, and unanswered questions, loosened slightly. Miko poured tea into 2 simple clay cups. They placed one in Harper's hands without speaking. The warmth seeped into Harper's skin. The cat settled at their feet, curled into a pale crescent. Its breathing was slow and steady, mirroring the rhythm of the greenhouse itself. They sipped. The tea was earthy, with the bright, clear notes of mint beneath. Harper closed their eyes briefly, letting the heat settle into the hollow spaces grief had carved. The air was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the faint patter of the first raindrops brushing the glass overhead. Miko spoke at last, voice low and deliberate. The lecture was never finished. Harper opened their eyes. Garden of Stars. Miko continued, gaze distant, focused on the skyline beyond the glass. Your father wanted to chart something no one else could see. Not just the movement of celestial bodies, but how they connected through time, across generations. He believed constellations were not fixed, that they could grow, change, become more than stories written by strangers long ago. Harper's fingers tightened around the teacup. He never explained that to me, they said quietly. Miko's eyes softened. He wasn't always good at explaining things with words, but he left the seeds in every way. The cat lifted its head, eyes reflecting the lamplight. Harper looked toward the planter in the center of the greenhouse. The soil lay still beneath the delicate mist that had begun to form inside the glass. No sprouts yet, but the seeds had been planted in time as well as earth. The quadrant wasn't missing, Harper whispered. It was waiting. Miko nodded. Outside, the rain gathered strength. Droplets traced gentle rivers down the sloped panes overhead. Their paths split and merged like tributaries finding the sea. The sky beyond was dark now. The comet had vanished behind cloud and mist. But Harper did not feel its absence as a loss. Its message had been delivered. Its crossing recorded not only in the journal or the atlas, but in the soil, the breath between old friends, the quiet acceptance of a new steward to carry the chart forward. Harper placed the empty teacup on the table. The soft clink felt like a marker, a turning point. Tomorrow, Miko said softly, we can begin the alignment. The quadrant can be completed. Harper nodded, breath steady. The cat stretched languidly and curled once more, as if it, too, had marked the passage of this quiet decision. The rain became a steady rhythm overhead, not a barrier, a blessing. The rain's rhythm softened as it continued, like fingertips trailing over glass. Harper leaned back in the chair, feeling the tea's warmth lingering in their chest, the cushion beneath them, cradling the ache that had long ago become part of their posture. A companion, more than a burden now. Across the low table, Miko remained still, one hand resting lightly on the edge, as though anchoring themselves to the present moment. The greenhouse was cocooned in sound, the quiet rustle of plants, the steady patter overhead, and the occasional creak of the building gently settling as the night deepened. Harper's gaze drifted to the central planter. The soil held its silence, but the seeds lay beneath, beginning their unseen work. Even the darkness was part of their process. Growth demanded patience. The stars themselves had always taken their time. Miko rose slowly, joints stiff, but movement graceful. They moved toward the work table where the journal, the atlas, and the vellum sketch still rested. If you'd like, Miko said softly, we can prepare the materials. The quadrant can be ready when the sky clears. Harper stood, the weight of weariness replaced by a steadier force, purpose. They crossed to the table and lifted the vellum, holding it carefully. The diagram's ink, though aged, remained clear. The missing constellation, traced by their father's hand, waited now not as a mystery, but as an invitation. I'll bring the chart back tomorrow, Harper said quietly. Miko nodded once. It belongs here now. The words weren't a question or a suggestion. They were a recognition. Harper carefully gathered the vellum and slipped it between the pages of the atlas. The journal remained open. Several loose sheets had shifted during the night's activities. Harper gathered them, eyes catching fragments of notes. Quadrant not fixed, must remain adaptive. Seeds as temporal anchors. Observe correlation with lunar cycles. Even in their father's absence, his thoughts continued the conversation. The cat stirred, stretching, then leapt silently from the table. It padded toward the greenhouse door, pausing to glance back at Harper as though sensing the moment of transition. The rain had eased to a fine mist. We'll need to realign the telescope before dawn, Miko said, lowering the kettle back to the counter. But for now, their voice trailed off. There was no need to finish the sentence. Rest was not just a concession to fatigue. It was part of the cycle, the gathering of breath before continuation. Harper inclined their head in agreement. They slipped the journal into the messenger bag, followed by the atlas. The envelope, now empty of its precious contents, rested lightly atop the other items. Its wax seal, cracked and broken, no longer held weight. The burden of secrecy had lifted. Miko returned to the planter, kneeling briefly to brush a palm across the damp soil. He would have been pleased, they murmured, though whether the words were meant for Harper or the quiet air was unclear. Harper crossed the stone floor toward the door. The cat preceded them once again, tail held high. Beyond the glass, the city had settled into its nocturnal rhythm. Headlights moved like fireflies along the river's edge. The towers wore their own constellations, windows lit in random patterns against the dark. The key rested cool against Harper's thigh, where it had become a familiar weight. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing the greenhouse's hush back into itself. The rooftop path stretched ahead, glistening with the night's moisture. As Harper walked, the mist curled around their ankles like a living thing. The distant lights of other high-rise windows glimmered in the damp air, each a silent witness to the city's countless private lives. At the elevator, the call button glowed with its steady, patient blue. Harper pressed it. The doors opened, and they stepped inside. As the elevator began its descent, Harper closed their eyes briefly. The upward movement earlier had been one of searching. This downward passage felt different. It was not a retreat, but a return, a gathering of all they had learned. The journal's weight against their hip was no longer a question mark. It was a chapter ready to turn. When the doors parted on the 47th floor, the hallway lay quiet and familiar. The abstract paintings watched in their silent, impartial way. Shadows pooled softly along the carpet. Harper approached their door, the fob clicking softly as the lock accepted them home. The apartment welcomed them with its cool, clean scent. The lights, dimmed in anticipation, cast a warm amber glow across the oak floors. The view beyond the windows was a darker mirror of the greenhouse's clarity, the skyline and river stretching wide, the sky veiled in gentle gray. Harper slipped off their shoes and crossed to the dining table. They placed the messenger bag gently atop it, fingers lingering on the worn strap. The atlas and journal would stay there tonight, close, but at rest. They moved to the wide window and leaned one hand against the cool glass. The river moved steadily far below, a ribbon of silver between the dark forms of bridges and towers. The mist softened the edges of everything, blending the sharp lines into a continuous, breathing whole. Above, the clouds thinned in places, revealing glimpses of the quadrant their father had left incomplete. But it did not feel incomplete anymore. Harper exhaled. The breath fogged the glass briefly before fading into transparency. The ache in their shoulders was quieter now. The fatigue had become a softer thing, a companion rather than a weight. The cycle was in motion. Seeds planted, sky watched, memory carried forward. Harper turned from the window, shutting the blinds gently. The bed called softly from the adjacent room. Sleep would not be an escape tonight. It would be a continuation. The quiet of the apartment felt deeper after the rooftop's night air. Harper moved slowly across the floor, each footstep softened by the oak beneath their socks. The lights remained low, casting long shadows across the room. The pulse of the city beyond the windows had faded into a soft, distant rhythm, a lullaby of river currents, occasional car horns smoothed by the mist, and the hum of towers resting in darkness. The messenger bag sat patiently on the dining table, Harper let it be. Tonight's work, tonight's searching, was complete. The ache of hunger returned in a gentle nudge. Not the sharpness of forgotten meals, but the quiet reminder of a body asking for care after hours of focus and meaning. In the kitchen, Harper filled a kettle and placed it on the stovetop. The click of the burner igniting sounded louder than expected in the hush. The flame's glow flickered blue against the marble backsplash. From the fridge came a container of the simple soup Harper had prepared that morning. Lentils, carrots, rosemary. The intention had been to eat before the evening unfolded, but plans had shifted. Purpose had rewritten the schedule. They poured the soup into a small pot, set it over the flame, and stirred gently. The warmth of the kitchen gathered around them. The scent of rosemary mingled with the lingering notes of the rooftop, the damp earth, the jasmine. Outside, rain continued as a soft sweep against the windows, more felt than heard. When the soup was ready, Harper ladled it into a deep white bowl. They placed it carefully on the dining table, beside the messenger bag and the quiet wisdom contained within it. A tall glass of water joined the meal. Harper sat. The first spoonful tasted of earth and patience. The lentils had softened fully during their slow cooking. Carrots offered sweetness. The rosemary spoke of the greenhouse, of the soil where new seeds rested. Each bite was a small grounding. The warmth traveled downward, filling the spaces left hollow by long hours of memory, of inquiry, of silent collaboration with a gardener and a silver-eyed cat. Harper ate slowly, the rhythm matching the rain's cadence on the glass. Halfway through the meal, their gaze fell again to the messenger bag. Without thinking, Harper reached for the journal. Their hands knew its texture now, the weathered leather, the slight give of the spine. They opened it beside the bowl, pages falling easily to the last section. A single loose sheet rested there. Harper unfolded it. The writing was their father's, the looping, precise script that had guided charts and lectures. But this was not a note or a calculation. It was a simple statement. Constellations can be planted. Beneath the words, a small sketch. The same quadrant design, but this time, the lines curved not into rigid geometries, but into the organic spread of a blooming flower. A reminder that the stars were not only distant fires. They were reflections of life's own growth. Patterns found in the unfurling of petals, the spread of roots, the trajectory of seeds carried on the wind. Harper closed the journal gently. The soup's last spoonfuls brought warmth that eased into their limbs, calming the last threads of tension. They carried the empty bowl and glass to the kitchen, rinsing them beneath warm water. Each movement was deliberate, ritualistic, not out of necessity, but respect for the night's work, for the cycle of effort and renewal. Harper dried their hands and returned to the table. The journal and atlas remained, silent companions. They slipped the journal back into the messenger bag, but left the atlas open. The vellum sketch still rested between the pages, waiting for tomorrow's alignment, waiting for the completion that would not be a finality, but a beginning. Harper lifted the bag and carried it to the window bench. The sky had cleared slightly. The mist had thinned over the river. Lights traced gentle arcs across the bridges. A few stars peeked through the gaps in the clouds, the same quadrant they had watched earlier now returning to view. Harper set the bag down and sat. The cushion beneath them gave softly. The window pane was cool against their shoulder as they leaned back. The cat's absence was felt, but not lonely. Somewhere above, it remained on watch with Miko and the seeds, the living constellation already at work beneath the soil. Harper's fingers traced the window's edge. Outside, the world moved quietly. Inside, a sense of arrival had settled, not at an end, at a new threshold. Harper let their breath deepen, each inhale and exhale a quiet promise to the self they had become over the course of the night. The body asked for rest. The mind agreed. They rose, crossed to the bedroom, and turned back the covers. The sheets were crisp and cool, the duvet soft with familiar weight. Harper set the messenger bag on the low bench at the foot of the bed, where it could rest close without intruding. The city lights formed a soft, moving glow beyond the curtains. Harper left the blinds half open. Tomorrow would come with its tasks, the alignment, the quadrants blooming, the silent ceremony of completing a pattern that had waited not just years, but lifetimes. But tonight was for quiet, for sleep, for carrying the constellation inward into the realm where dreams could continue the work in ways waking thought could not. Harper slipped beneath the covers. The rain had faded. In its place, the hush of the city and the slow breathing of one who had crossed the threshold of uncertainty into purpose. Eyes closed. Breath slowed. The seeds slept. So did Harper. Night passed gently. The rain had ceased long before the first gray breath of dawn reached the city's edges. Sleep, when it came, had not been deep but steady. A quiet drifting, untroubled by sharp dreams or restless thought. Harper lay still as the earliest light pressed softly against the blinds, not yet bright enough to call for full waking. For a time they listened. The subtle sounds of the city before daybreak, the distant hum of service trucks, the muted sweep of tires over damp streets, a faint whistle of wind tracing between the towers. From high above, where the river bent like a silver ribbon beneath the skyline, fog moved in slow, elegant folds. Harper stirred. The duvet fell away in a soft rustle. Feet met the cool floor. They stood, stretching, feeling the pull of muscles waking after hours of stillness. The ache in their shoulders had faded, replaced by something else, a quiet readiness. The messenger bag rested patiently on the bench. Harper lifted it gently and brought it to the dining table. The apartment was still dark except for the pre-dawn blue stealing in through the half-open blinds. They switched on the smallest lamp near the kitchen. Its golden light pooled softly across the table, brushing over the atlas and the journal. The journal opened easily. Pages turned without effort now. Harper paused at a familiar passage, one they had not noticed before in the flood of diagrams and calculations. A constellation is a conversation across generations, stars as words, gaps as the silence where new voices may speak. Beneath, their father's handwriting grew smaller. Skyhaven is not the end of this dialogue, it is the next speaker. Harper closed the journal, pressing their palm against the leather cover for a lingering moment. The cat was not in sight. But its absence was not unsettling. It too had its rhythms. Perhaps it waited already at the rooftop, where the seeds rested beneath the soil. Harper gathered the atlas next. The vellum sketch remained folded within its pages. They removed it, spreading it flat across the tabletop. The ink had dried so many years ago, but the lines remained precise. The blank quadrant called. Not with the urgency of a question, but with the calm patience of an unfinished thought. the morning light began to brighten. Harper moved into the kitchen and filled the kettle once more. As it heated, they retrieved a mug and added a spoonful of local honey and a twist of lemon peel. The scent was sharp and fresh in the warming air. When the water boiled, Harper poured it over the waiting mug. Steam curled upward, catching the pale glow of dawn, now gathering strength beyond the windows. The city still slumbered in places. Only a few towers showed the signs of early risers, pockets of yellow light shining like distant beacons. Cradling the mug, Harper returned to the table. They sipped slowly, letting the heat spread through their chest as the meaning of the hours ahead settled more fully into thought. Today was not about completion for its own sake. The quadrant would not become just another map or a solved puzzle. It was a bridge, a way to carry forward the voice that had started the conversation and to offer a place for new voices, Harper's, Miko's, and others yet unknown. The tea finished. Harper rinsed the mug and set it carefully in the sink. The messenger bag accepted the journal and vellum once more. The atlas remained in hand. The sky outside had lifted from gray to a pale opaline blue. The fog thinned, revealing the steady march of bridges and the first streaks of light glinting off river currents. Harper crossed to the window. The quadrant, the empty quadrant, now visible again overhead. Clouds had parted during the night. The alignment would be possible. The cat's absence felt different now. Not a lack, a signal. "Time to go," Harper whispered, though no one was present to hear it. They slipped into a light jacket. The key rested in its familiar pocket. The bag's strap settled across their shoulder. Harper moved to the door, hand pausing briefly on the latch. The apartment behind them had become not just a resting place, but a launch point. The accumulation of years of searching had found a quiet culmination here. They opened the door. The corridor stretched ahead, quiet and dim, as though the building itself still lingered in dreams. Each step was slow, intentional. At the elevator, the call button glowed softly. When the doors parted, the cabin inside was empty and expectant. Harper stepped in without hesitation and pressed the button marked R. The ascent was silent, but the movement carried no uncertainty now. Each floor passed was not a departure, but a gathering, a layering of meaning, of steps that had led from an unopened crate to planted seeds to a waiting sky. The elevator slowed. A soft chime. The doors opened. Harper stepped into the pale morning light. The rooftop awaited. The rooftop greeted Harper with the hush of early morning. Mist clung low across the stone paths and planters, trailing in soft ribbons that curled around the bases of the crescent pots. The air was cool but carried the promise of warmth to come, the kind of delicate balance between night's end and the first breath of day. Above, the quadrant lay visible once more. Pale blue sky gave way to the receding stars. The blank space no longer felt vacant. It waited like a canvas, as a gardener might pause before laying the first seeds of a design. The greenhouse door stood slightly ajar. Harper moved toward it, the messenger bag steady against their hip, the atlas in hand. Their fingers curled around its familiar weight, tracing the edges of the cover where the silver foil stars had dulled from years of touch. The door eased open with a gentle sigh. Inside, warmth embraced them. The greenhouse had become a living cocoon overnight. Mist from the rain still clung to the glass walls, catching the early light and breaking it into soft golden fragments. Plants stirred faintly in the warming air, leaves lifting toward the promise of sunrise. Miko stood at the central table, sleeves rolled back, hands resting lightly on the edge. The cat was already there too, perched on the work table beside the planter where the seeds had been sown. Its silver eyes reflected the diffuse light, steady and calm. Harper crossed the threshold, letting the door close softly behind them. No words were needed. They moved to the table and laid the atlas open. The vellum sketch followed, unfolded with care and placed beside it. The missing quadrant faced upward, lines sharp and ready. Miko inclined their head in approval. "You slept?" The question was simple. "Enough." Miko smiled, just barely. They gestured toward the telescope, already waiting near the observatory alcove. Its brass gleamed softly in the filtered light. The cloth covering it had been removed. It stood ready, an old companion awaiting new purpose. Harper moved toward it, pausing first by the planter. The soil remained dark and quiet, but new threads of green had emerged at the edges. Tiny shoots, not yet leaves, but the first promise of growth. The seeds had begun to answer the invitation of the earth. A breath gathered in Harper's chest, not surprise, not even joy. A deeper, quieter recognition. The cycle had already begun. "They've sprouted," Harper whispered. Miko nodded. They were waiting too. The cat stretched languidly, tail curving like a crescent moon. Harper stepped back to the telescope, fingers tracing the cool brass of the mount. They adjusted the eyepiece with care, guided by both memory and the silent, expectant atmosphere that had gathered in the greenhouse. Miko joined them, offering the folded pages of the final chart. Together they consulted the journal's last notations, coordinates inked in Harper's father's meticulous script. Quadrant not fixed, must remain adaptive. The stars were not bound. They moved. They breathed, just as the earth and its life did. The telescope aligned smoothly. As Harper made the final adjustments, a faint sound filled the air. The soft, steady whistle of the kettle warming on the small stove at the alcove's edge. Steam curled upward, catching in the golden morning light like translucent silk. Miko moved to it, pouring the heated water into a shallow bowl. They placed it at the base of the planter where the seeds had begun their ascent. The steam rose gently into the greenhouse's warmth, a blessing in vapor form, a ritual without words. The cat padded over and sat beside the bowl, eyes closing as if in meditation. The mist beyond the glass began to lift. Light sharpened, catching the rims of the planters, the edges of the telescope's frame, and the gentle curve of the unfolding leaves. Harper looked back at the journal, at the notes that had once seemed cryptic and unreachable. Observe correlation with lunar cycles. Seeds as temporal anchors. Skyhaven bloom. These were not just academic musings. They were instructions for a dialogue between sky and soil, past and present, chart and living growth. Harper placed a palm flat against the journal's page, feeling the slight give beneath their fingers. The texture of the paper was familiar now, a grounding force. The cat stirred and returned to the table, leaping gracefully beside the atlas. Miko stood quietly, one hand resting on the back of the chair, eyes steady and bright despite the years etched into their face. "It's time." Harper nodded. They turned back to the telescope, breath steady, fingers light on the adjustments. The eyepiece framed the blank quadrant once more. Stars lingered at the edges. The missing pattern waited, but not for long. The greenhouse settled into a hush that felt different than the stillness of night. This was the quiet of intention, the moment before a seed breaks its shell, the second before a constellation takes its first recognizable shape. Harper stood beside the telescope, adjusting the final settings with care. Brass wheels turned smoothly beneath their fingertips, the metal cool but yielding. The morning light traced golden lines across the instrument's frame. Outside, the mist had fully lifted. The rooftops of neighboring towers caught the first silver strokes of sunlight. The river gleamed below, a wide, slow ribbon reflecting the clean brightness of a world reborn from rain. In the greenhouse, the warmth deepened. Miko had arranged several small cushions around the central planter, as if the earth itself were a guest of honor. The cat curled among them, paws tucked beneath its slender body, silver eyes half-lidded in contentment. The tiny sprouts in the soil had grown perceptibly, though no human eye could have measured the difference. Their green tips reached upward, delicate but sure. Harper lifted the vellum sketch and studied the quadrant once more. The lines their father had drawn now felt like musical notation, a silent melody waiting to be played. Each plotted star a note, each gap an intentional pause where new voices might fill the space. They pressed the sketch gently onto the telescope's platform, anchoring it beside the eyepiece. Miko approached, carrying the journal open to the final pages. The text was clear, though the ink had faded slightly with time. Seeds planted in earth and mapped in sky. A living constellation. Chart to be aligned not only with optics, but with intention. Completion is not static. It breathes. Harper exhaled slowly, letting the weight of those words settle. This was not about fixing something into permanence. It was about bridging what had been and what could yet unfold. Miko placed a hand on the telescope's base. When you are ready. Harper adjusted the final dial. The telescope's view aligned with the quadrant's boundaries. Through the eyepiece, the pale blue of early morning framed the last lingering stars. The comet had already passed beyond visibility, but its trail felt woven into the sky's deeper fabric. The pattern of the quadrant became clear, no longer blank, no longer waiting. Harper lifted the journal and positioned it beside the atlas. They removed the pen their father had used, its black lacquer surface smooth and familiar, the gold clip still polished despite years of neglect. Miko watched silently, hands clasped at their back. Harper drew in a breath and began tracing the final lines on the vellum. One by one, they connected the stars visible through the telescope's lens to the plotted points on the chart. The lines arced gracefully, intersecting in the organic pattern first sketched in the journal, the living constellation shaped like a blooming flower. Each stroke of ink was deliberate. No rush, no hesitation. The chart accepted the additions without protest. The gaps closed, not as an erasure of silence, but as a welcoming of the new. Harper's pulse steadied. The pen moved across the vellum, its sound barely audible over the morning hush. The delicate scratch of ink against paper, a quiet symphony to accompany the act of alignment. As the final line connected, the chart breathed into completeness. Harper stepped back. Miko exhaled softly. Not a sigh, a release. The cat stood, tail lifting. It stepped lightly onto the atlas, placing one paw just beside the quadrant's center. A single green shoot in the planter mirrored the gesture, its tip curving in the same direction as the constellation's final arc. "It's done," Harper said, though the words carried no sense of finality. Miko nodded. Or rather, begun. The greenhouse filled with morning light. Sunbeams filtered through the glass, casting the patterns of the growing plants across the stone floor in shifting silhouettes. The faint lines of the vellum sketch mirrored those shadows. Ink and light became reflections of the same unfolding truth. Harper rested their hand lightly on the telescope. It had carried the vision forward, but the chart now lived in the soil as well. "We'll leave this here today," Miko said softly, gesturing to the chart and journal. "They belong to the garden now." Harper agreed. They gathered the pen and placed it carefully beside the planter. The black lacquer gleamed briefly in the sunlight, a final signature offered not in writing, but in presence. The greenhouse doors remained open, letting the morning air circulate freely. The city stirred below, distant and steady, unaware of the quiet work that had unfolded in this high green sanctuary. The alignment was complete, but its meaning would continue to grow. The light inside the greenhouse grew softer as the sun continued its slow ascent, diffused by the last thin traces of morning mist. Harper stood motionless, watching how the inked lines of the newly completed quadrant, once sharp against the vellum, now seemed to dissolve slightly beneath the golden rays, not fading, becoming part of the larger rhythm, like roots threading into soil, like constellations blending into the full sky where they belonged. The cat circled the planter once more. Its tail brushed against Harper's ankle, a light, grounding touch. Then it moved to the window ledge and curled into a compact shape, eyes narrowed contentedly. Miko stepped forward to stand beside Harper. No words passed between them. There was no need. The alignment had created not just a chart or a moment of scholarly satisfaction. It had bridged something older than the stars themselves, something all people carried within them, though most rarely gave it voice. The need to connect their stories to the wider world, to leave not a mark of ownership, but of relationship. The seeds in the planter stood as quiet testament. The tallest sprout swayed gently in a breeze, filtering through the slightly opened greenhouse door. Its delicate green leaves cupped toward the light. The other shoots followed, each a small expression of trust in the cycle that had begun before memory and would continue beyond understanding. "Observe correlation with lunar cycles," Harper's father had written. And now, as Harper gazed beyond the greenhouse toward the river, they saw it. The moon's pale disk just beginning to lower toward the horizon, dimmed by daylight, but present still. A steady companion, moving with the same patient rhythm as the river currents far below. Miko stirred beside them and gestured toward the wide doors leading to the open rooftop deck. "Come." Harper followed. The rooftop had dried fully, the stone paths warmed slightly by the new sun. The chairs along the perimeter remained empty, facing the slow shimmer of the river and the distant haze of the skyline. Beyond, the bridges stretched, their graceful arcs holding the weight of traffic not yet fully woken to the day. They paused near the glass balustrade. The wind brushed over their faces, bringing with it the faint metallic scent of the river and the memory of last night's rain. Harper rested both hands on the smooth top rail and leaned forward slightly. The city was different now. The towers that had once felt like barriers, like distant, untouchable islands, now appeared as threads in the same weave as the sky and the soil, the same weave as the seeds planted below and the stars traced above. Patterns, connections. An unnamed calm spread through Harper's chest. The cat joined them, leaping lightly onto the low wall and sitting with perfect poise. Its silver eyes reflected the brightening sky. Miko stood slightly apart, gaze steady on the horizon, where the sun had begun to clear the tallest buildings. The light sharpened. The shadows of the crescent planters stretched long across the stone. Miko spoke, voice soft. "Your father would not have wanted a monument." Harper nodded. He wanted growth. He wanted continuity. The breeze shifted. High above, wisps of cloud moved lazily, their edges tinged with soft gold. Harper looked toward the quadrant overhead. The completed constellation was invisible now to the naked eye, washed out by daylight. Yet knowing it was there changed everything. What had once been absence was now presence. A silent architecture holding space for new stories, new lives. "It will keep growing," Harper said, "even without us watching." Miko smiled faintly, lines softening around their eyes. That's how constellations work. The cat blinked slowly, as though in agreement. They stood together for a long while, letting the sounds of the waking city rise gently around them, birds calling from unseen perches, the low hum of vehicles stirring below, the occasional sharp cry of a gull wheeling above the river. The rooftop remained a sanctuary, but it was no longer just a place of retreat. It had become a place of return, a living reminder that the space between stars and between people was not emptiness, but possibility. The sun continued its slow, deliberate rise, stretching light across the rooftop and greenhouse glass until every surface seemed dusted in gold. Harper felt the quiet moment settle fully, a rare stillness that didn't ask for decisions or action, just presence. Miko gave a slight nod, as if acknowledging the pause was enough. They turned back toward the greenhouse, moving with the quiet ease of someone who had long ago learned to listen to the rhythm of living things. Harper followed at a slower pace. The telescope remained near the observatory alcove, still pointed toward the now invisible quadrant. Its brass edges caught the light, not as a relic, but as a companion. The vellum sketch lay beside it, edges curling slightly in the warming air. The inked lines, the living constellation, held firm. The cat padded in ahead of them and leapt gracefully onto the work table. It circled once, then settled beside the open atlas, silver eyes half closed. Miko gathered the journal and the completed vellum and set them carefully into a shallow wooden tray. A cloth was draped over them, not to hide, but to protect. The kind of gesture made when tending seeds or preserving a letter meant to outlive its sender. "This will stay here," Miko said softly, voice low but certain. "The greenhouse will remember." Harper didn't speak. Words seemed too sharp for the quiet that had grown between them. Instead, they reached out and touched the edge of the planter where the seedlings stood. The tallest sprout had stretched a little further, catching more of the morning light. Its leaves unfolded slightly, small green stars rising to greet the day. "Tomorrow," Harper whispered, though they weren't sure if it was to the plant, to Miko, or to themselves, or the day after, whenever the sky calls again. Miko inclined their head. No rush, no pressure. The sky moved at its own pace. Growth obeyed no clocks. The cat stood, tail lifted, and padded back toward the door. A signal. It was time to return. Harper gathered the empty messenger bag and followed Miko into the fresh air. The rooftop garden remained still, but for the gentle sway of the vines and grasses. A pair of birds swept low over the river's glinting surface far below. The elevator stood waiting. Miko placed a steadying hand on Harper's shoulder. A brief, grounding touch, then stepped back. "You know where to find us." Harper smiled, small but real. The elevator doors opened without a sound. Harper stepped inside. As the doors closed, the last glimpse of the rooftop showed the greenhouse shining in the full morning light, its glass walls no longer cold or opaque, but glowing. The cat remained in the doorway, watching until the metal doors sealed the view. The descent felt different now. No longer a retreat or a withdrawal, just the next step in a continuing pattern. The apartment greeted Harper with familiar warmth. The automatic lights remained off. The natural light was enough. Pale golden shafts stretched across the oak flooring. The skyline beyond the windows shimmered through the last remnants of fog. Harper set the messenger bag on the window bench and moved to the kitchen. The kettle still rested where it had cooled the night before. They filled it again and set it to boil, movement slow and deliberate. The apartment's stillness was not empty. It was the pause before the next movement in a larger composition. As the kettle began to hum softly, Harper crossed to the window. The blinds were already open. Beyond the glass, the river wound steadily through the waking city. Traffic moved in measured lines across the bridges. The buildings cast long shadows westward. The quadrant overhead, invisible by day, hovered in Harper's thoughts, not as a mystery anymore, but as a companion. A shape they had helped define, a shape that would now grow, change, and pass into other hands when the time came. The kettle clicked off. Harper poured the water over a sprig of fresh mint and a slice of lemon in a waiting mug. The steam curled upward, soft and fragrant. Cradling the mug, they returned to the window bench. They sat. For a long moment, Harper simply watched the city unfold below. People on bicycles weaving between cars, a delivery boat cutting slow ripples into the river's surface, window washers beginning their ascent along the tower opposite, life continuing, patterns repeating, new shapes forming within familiar frames. Harper sipped the tea slowly. The warmth spread outward, grounding them once again. The living constellation was no longer just lines in a journal or ink on vellum. It was here, in the shoots in the soil, in the shifting sky, in the quiet understanding shared between people and between those who had come before and those yet to come. The cat would return. Miko would tend the seedlings. The telescope would align again. And Harper would watch, not as an outsider, but as a participant. Completion is not static. It breathes. The journal's words echoed softly in their thoughts. Harper smiled to themselves, a breath, a pause, and readiness for whatever came next. The tea's warmth lingered as Harper stood, moving from the window with slow, steady purpose. They set the empty mug in the sink and returned to the living area. The apartment had become more than a living space. It was now an extension of the chart, the garden, the sky. A place not of endings, but continuations. The messenger bag rested on the window bench, empty now, its task fulfilled. Harper left it untouched and crossed to the bedroom, where the soft folds of the sheets remained undisturbed from the early morning rise. They paused by the bed, fingers grazing the edge of the cool linen, then continued to the small wooden table beside it. A weathered, leather-bound sketchbook lay waiting, a habit from years past that had not seen use since before their father's final departure. Harper lifted it, the spine giving slightly as it opened to a blank page. They sat by the window once more, legs folded beneath them. A pencil rested in the sketchbook's binding. Harper turned it gently between their fingers, then lowered the point to the page. No rush, no expectation. Just the quiet act of making a mark, as their father once had, as Miko still did, as the gardeners of the sky had always done. The first lines were simple. A horizon traced lightly. The river's slow curve drawn with deliberate strokes. Above it, faint arcs where towers and bridges met the air. Then came the quadrant, placed as it had appeared the night before. The stars inked in memory now, not observation. But that was the point. A living constellation did not need perfect replication. It needed presence, continuity. Harper paused. The pencil tip hovered over the quadrant's center. Then, gently, they sketched the unfurling leaves, the seedlings from the greenhouse planter, stylized but unmistakable, roots stretching down, shoots reaching up, bridging the earth and the sky. As the drawing grew, so did a quiet steadiness in Harper's breath. They closed the sketchbook and rested it beside them. For a long moment, they simply sat, letting the rhythms of the city move past the windows like the steady pulse of the river below. The elevator hums in the neighboring towers, the faint voices of early risers calling to one another from unseen balconies, the soft whoosh of a breeze finding its way between stone and steel. Harper rose and moved to the kitchen. Breakfast was simple. Oats simmered in a small pot with a pinch of salt and a drizzle of honey. The aroma of warm grain filled the air, familiar and grounding. As the oats cooked, Harper retrieved a small potted herb from the windowsill, a cutting from the greenhouse's mint, gifted by Miko weeks before the quadrant's mystery had fully unfolded. They plucked a few leaves and stirred them into the oats, the scent brightening instantly. When the meal was ready, Harper spooned it into a plain ceramic bowl and carried it back to the window bench. They ate slowly, each bite an act of presence, of honoring the body that had carried them through the night's work and into this new day. The sun climbed steadily, casting clean, sharp shadows across the floor. The bridges below moved with the increasing rhythm of commuters and early workers. The city's steady breath continued, unchanged, yet transformed in Harper's eyes. The empty bowl returned to the sink. Dishes rinsed, hands dried, movements smooth, unhurried. Harper crossed to the wardrobe. The day's clothes were simple. Soft, dark jeans and a loose, light gray sweater. No need for formality. Today was not for performance. It was for observation, for quiet stewardship, for returning to the greenhouse when the sky called again. Before leaving the bedroom, Harper paused by the sketchbook, brushing fingertips over the cover. They did not take it. Some things were meant to stay in the place they were created. A record, a marker. In the living room, Harper retrieved the key from the tray by the door. Its weight was familiar now, less an anchor than a compass. They slipped it into their pocket. Shoes slid on, a lightweight jacket lifted from the hook. The apartment remained still as Harper moved toward the door. One hand rested briefly on the handle, fingers tracing the grain of the wood. A breath. Steady. Then the latch turned softly. The corridor beyond stretched ahead, unchanged but full of possibility. The day awaited, and the cycle continued. The corridor was quiet, the early morning hush still holding firm as Harper walked toward the elevator. The soft pressure of the key in their pocket felt less like a tool now and more like a simple reassurance, a symbol of the path they had chosen and the cycle that was now in motion. The elevator doors slid open smoothly and Harper stepped inside, pressing the familiar R. The ascent was silent but full of meaning. Each floor that passed brought not just proximity to the rooftop, but to the ongoing work. The quiet tending of the seedlings, the quiet tending of the self. As the doors parted, the rooftop garden unfolded in a spill of light and shadow. The mist had burned away completely. Morning air was fresh, carrying the scent of damp stone and the green, clean breath of the plants. The crescent moon planters stood with new clarity. Dew still clung to the edges of leaves and to the slender shoots in the greenhouse planter. Some of the sprouts had doubled in height overnight. A few now bore the first hint of leaves unfurling. Small, precise ovals that mirrored the arcs Harper had drawn in the quadrant. Miko was already there, seated at the edge of the greenhouse's open door. A small, cloth-bound book rested on their knee, but they were not reading. Their eyes followed the play of light on the leaves and the slow movement of the clouds above. The cat rested at their feet, stretched long and still in the sun. Harper approached quietly, setting their messenger bag down at the threshold. Miko glanced up and offered a nod. Nothing more was needed. The work had shifted from a mystery to solve into a rhythm to maintain. Harper moved to the planter and knelt, fingertips brushing the soil lightly. It was cool and firm beneath the surface, the roots hidden but steady. The green shoots quivered slightly in a passing breeze. "They're strong," Harper said softly. Miko nodded again. "They know how to grow." There was no ceremony now, no unveiling or dramatic turning of pages. The chart had already been written, the constellation mapped. What remained was observation, quiet tending, a living participation in something that would outlast this day, this season, even their own lives. Harper looked up toward the sky. The blank quadrant was invisible in the daylight, but in their mind's eye, the lines and stars remained clear. The arcs had become familiar, like the shape of a river's bend or the contour of a hillside. The cat stirred and padded to the edge of the planter. It sat tall, ears forward, as though marking the sprouting leaves as new stars in their own right. The alignment was no longer between telescope and chart, but between living things and the greater pattern that held them all. Harper sat back, the greenhouse's warm air brushing against cooler drafts from the river. A wave of drowsiness settled in, not exhaustion, but the kind of deep stillness that comes after long effort and understanding. They let their eyes drift closed. In the darkness behind their lids, the quadrant formed again. But this time, it was not a static chart. The arcs moved gently, shifting like branches swaying in the wind or the slow turn of the river's current. The stars pulsed faintly, some dimming as others brightened. The living constellation breathed. The seedling's leaves appeared in the pattern, curving upward into the design. The roots stretched down, their fine tendrils tracing unseen paths through the soil, matching the invisible lines between stars. Harper's breath slowed. Sleep hovered at the edges of wakefulness, not heavy, not insistent. Just a gentle tide pulling them toward the dream space, where patterns and memories intertwined. In that space, they stood once again in the greenhouse, but the structure had grown impossibly tall. The glass walls stretched upward into the sky until they vanished, leaving only open air. The planter at the center had expanded into a vast garden. The seedlings had become full trees, each branch tipped with soft glowing lights, stars within leaves. Miko stood at the garden's edge, unchanged, calm. The cat moved along a path of starlight that curved into the distance. Beyond, Harper's father appeared, not as a solid figure, but as a suggestion of presence, the shape of memory held in the way the light gathered around the tallest tree. No words passed between them. None were needed. The living constellation had become a landscape, a place where the past was not separate from the present, where growth was not a linear path, but a spiral, returning again and again to new beginnings. A breeze stirred the dream garden's branches. The leaves whispered, not in speech, but in the language of motion and time. The roots stretched deeper. The stars above shifted slowly, marking not hours or days, but seasons and cycles. Harper exhaled in the dream and in the waking world at once. The warmth of the greenhouse, the scent of soil, the presence of the cat and Miko, all blended into the greater rhythm. The quadrant was not a puzzle to be solved. It was an evolving relationship. Slowly, Harper opened their eyes. The seedlings swayed gently. Miko's hand rested lightly on the edge of the planter. "The dream?" they asked, voice soft but knowing. Harper nodded. No explanation was needed. The living constellation would continue both in the sky and in the earth, and in dreams. The dream lingered, not as a sharp memory, but as a subtle echo, like the scent of jasmine remaining on a sleeve after leaving the greenhouse. Harper remained seated for a long moment, hands resting lightly on their knees, breath steady and even. Miko had returned to their chair near the greenhouse door, the cat now curled asleep at their feet. The morning had slipped forward unnoticed. The light had shifted from the pale gold of dawn to the cleaner, crisper white of mid-morning. Shadows shortened. The seedlings' leaves reflected the changing light, their small veins catching the glow. Each sprout mirrored the arcs of the completed quadrant. The living constellation was not just a symbol anymore. It had entered the quiet, organic cycle of growth. Harper rose slowly, the stiffness in their legs eased by the warmth of the greenhouse and the grounding calm that had become as steady as breath. They crossed to the observatory alcove and retrieved the sketchbook they had begun that morning. Sitting once more on the low bench, they opened to the next blank page and began to draw. The lines came easily now, a curve for the horizon. The greenhouse's familiar shape nestled against the skyline. The seedlings sketched with quick, sure strokes. And above them, the constellation, the living quadrant, not as fixed stars, but as branching points, each connected by arcs that evoked both the old chart and the new growth. Harper paused, the pencil hovering above the page. The dream's garden returned in flashes. Not all could be captured in a simple sketch. Some things were meant to remain fluid, breathing only in the spaces between wakefulness and sleep. They finished the drawing with a light touch, closing the circle that bound the sky and the soil. Miko approached silently and stood behind Harper, observing the sketch without comment. Their presence was a quiet affirmation. No critique, no instruction. Only recognition that the pattern continued. Outside, the river below moved in long, slow ripples. A barge drifted beneath the far bridge. Its wake unfolded behind it in perfect arcs, matching the design of the quadrant in motion. Harper closed the sketchbook and set it aside. They turned to the telescope, still aligned with the sky. The eyepiece reflected nothing now but the soft blue of daylight. Still, they adjusted it gently, more as ritual than necessity, reaffirming the connection between sky and soil. Miko placed a fresh pot of tea on the work table, the steam rising in slender spirals. The scent was softer this time, lemon balm and chamomile. Calming. Harper poured a cup for each of them, the act becoming as much a part of the ongoing alignment as the telescope or the seedlings. They sipped in silence. The greenhouse had become a vessel, holding not just plants and charts, but a shared understanding. The cat stretched lazily, then settled again, tail twitching slightly with each passing breeze. As the morning deepened, Miko retrieved a set of transparent acetate sheets from a narrow drawer. They placed them over the vellum sketch, aligning the edges carefully. On these, they had begun to note observations, the growth patterns of the seedlings, the subtle shifts in the quadrant's stellar positions, the lunar phases marked in thin, looping script. They offered Harper a marker, and together, they annotated the chart's new life. Constellation growth documented, Harper wrote in small, careful letters at the edge of the quadrant. Miko added a simple note beneath it. Cycle ongoing. The transparency was layered back onto the atlas, the annotations becoming a living record not of completion, but of continuous observation. Harper felt the simple, steady pleasure of stewardship, not ownership, not authorship. Caretaking, participation. The wind stirred outside. A few leaves scattered along the rooftop path, their movement echoing the arcs and lines they had traced in the soil and in the sky. Harper finished the tea and stood, stretching their arms overhead. The tension of past days had eased fully now, replaced by quiet readiness for whatever would come next. They crossed to the planter once more and rested a hand lightly on the soil. The seedlings stood firm and new. We'll continue tomorrow, Miko said softly. Harper nodded. The cycle would not pause. Growth did not wait for human schedules or the turning of pages. As they prepared to return downstairs, Harper gathered the sketchbook and closed the atlas gently. They left the transparencies in place. The key remained in their pocket, not as a tool now, but as a symbol. The greenhouse and the quadrant did not require unlocking anymore. The doors stood open, the patterns shared. The cat rose and padded to Harper's side, walking beside them as they crossed to the elevator. Miko remained by the planter, a silent guardian. Harper pressed the call button. The elevator doors opened. As they stepped inside, the cat paused at the threshold, then returned to Miko's side. Some things belong to the rooftop now. Harper understood. As the elevator descended, Harper closed their eyes for a moment. In their mind, the quadrant remained clear. Stars and seedlings, past and present, growth and observation. The living constellation breathing in both the sky and the soil, the cycle continued. The elevator's gentle descent became a familiar meditation, the hum beneath Harper's feet steady, neither rising nor falling in urgency. just motion. The walls reflected faint, softened versions of their image, curved gently by the brushed metal panels. There was no need to check the floor numbers. The journey itself had become part of the rhythm, as natural as the river's flow or the arc of leaves turning toward the sun. When the doors parted on the 47th floor, Harper stepped into the quiet corridor. The muted lights along the walls traced a path that felt less like a hallway now and more like a passage between distinct yet connected worlds. The condo's door opened easily beneath their touch. The space inside welcomed without fanfare. The morning light had shifted since they left. Sharper, clearer. The glass windows revealed the full expanse of the city in motion. The bridges traced clean lines across the water. The distant hum of traffic had settled into its daytime cadence. Harper removed the jacket and placed it neatly over the back of a chair. The messenger bag rested where it had been left earlier that morning. They moved to the kitchen, filling a glass with water, the cool liquid refreshing after the warmth of the greenhouse. Each movement felt deliberate, part of a wider ritual of balance. At the window, Harper paused, observing how the river caught the light. The same river they had watched each day now mirrored the arcs of the quadrant. The way currents curved around the pilings of the bridges. The way waves rippled in widening circles when interrupted by passing boats. Natural lines that spoke the same language as the constellation above and the seedlings below. They returned to the table and opened their personal journal, a separate volume from the atlas and transparencies housed in the greenhouse. This book was not for the formal recording of data or precise coordinates. It was for reflections, sketches, thoughts captured before they dissolved into the day's momentum. On a fresh page, Harper drew the quadrant's familiar shape. Not with ruler straight lines this time. The arcs were softer, resembling the paths traced by wind or the slow reach of roots underground. Around the edges, they added small notations. First shoots, cycle begun, dream quadrant expanding. At the center, they paused. Then carefully, they added a simple symbol, not a star or a leaf. A circle open at one side, suggesting both containment and the possibility of growth beyond its edges. The page complete, Harper set the journal aside. Their stomach reminded them gently of the passing time. In the kitchen, they prepared a small midday meal. Slices of bread lightly toasted, fresh goat cheese spread in a thin layer. A few sprigs of mint added, their leaves bright against the soft white. A drizzle of honey, simple, nourishing. They ate at the window bench, observing the city's continuous unfolding. Pedestrians moved along the waterfront paths. Cyclists wove between them. The bridges pulsed with the measured progress of vehicles. Above, a single gull traced a long, gliding arc that matched the quadrant's curves without knowing. When the meal was finished, Harper washed the plate and returned it to its place. The clean surfaces of the kitchen reflected a quiet order. Not rigidity, but readiness. The afternoon stretched ahead, spacious and unhurried. They crossed to the wardrobe and selected clothing suited to the greenhouse's gentle climate, a soft linen shirt and light trousers. The body's needs met with care. The mind allowed its thoughts to drift and settle like leaves on water. The messenger bag remained empty. The journal would stay here today. The rooftop no longer required symbols or tools, just presence. Harper slipped the key into their pocket, though it was more habit than necessity. The door opened once again, and they stepped into the corridor's calm. The elevator's arrival was prompt, its doors parting as if already expecting them. The ascent resumed. No longer a journey from one world to another, but a continuation of the same cycle. As the elevator rose, Harper closed their eyes briefly. In the quiet, they visualized the quadrant not as a chart, but as a garden of moments. Sprouts unfolding, stars shifting, roots deepening, dreams returning not as escape, but as guidance. The alignment continued. The elevator doors opened with their usual hush, releasing Harper onto the rooftop once more. The air had warmed noticeably, the soft chill of morning replaced by a gentle, expansive heat. The sky was clean and blue, stretching high above the towers, with only a few small clouds trailing toward the river's edge. Light flooded the rooftop garden, sharp but not harsh, the kind that made the green of the leaves deeper, more vivid. The crescent planters glowed at their rims where sunlight caught the metal edges. A fine breeze stirred the taller grasses. The greenhouse door stood ajar, propped open as if in welcome. Harper crossed the stone path quietly, each step measured and steady, not from caution, but from instinct. The garden's rhythm had begun to shape the pace of their body as well as the mind. Inside the greenhouse, warmth gathered gently, not stagnant, but lively with the scent of earth and growing things. The seedlings in the central planter had risen further. New leaves unfurled, edges still curled slightly in the way of young growth, but promising a swift ascent. Their forms already echoed the patterns from the vellum quadrant, not as exact lines, but as arcs and gestures, the way branches reached or roots divided. A living mirror. Miko was seated nearby, writing calmly in a narrow notebook. Their face relaxed, eyes lifted occasionally from the page to observe the leaves, the shifting light, the passage of clouds across the glass ceiling. The cat dozed on the work table, paws tucked neatly beneath its body, silver eyes closed. Harper approached without speaking. They knelt by the planter, fingertips resting lightly on the soil's surface. It was warm from the midday sun, yet retained the deep, cool dampness just below. The roots, unseen, continued their silent work. Miko closed the notebook softly. They are well, no signs of strain. This variety seems suited to the rooftop's exposure. Harper nodded. The seedlings had passed the most vulnerable stage. Growth had become assured. Still, observation remained important. The rhythm of tending was not just for the plants, but for those who watched over them. The telescope remained in its corner, covered now not to shield it from use, but as a sign that the alignment was temporarily complete. Not ended, but paused. The quadrant continued to evolve not through recalibration, but through what lived beneath the soil and in the air. Harper stood and moved toward the alcove where they and Miko had spent so many recent hours reviewing charts, sharing tea, and recording observations. The kettle rested cool on its stand. They refilled it with fresh water and set it to warm once more. As the quiet hiss of the heating element began, Harper retrieved the sketchbook and placed it on the table without opening it. Some moments were better held in presence than recorded immediately. Miko rose and joined them, bringing 2 simple cups. The cat stirred and stretched languidly, but remained atop the work table, content in the filtered light. They sipped tea together in the deepening stillness of early afternoon. The greenhouse air held the scent of rosemary, mint, and something sweeter, the jasmine just beginning to bloom again near the trellis. Beyond the glass, the city moved steadily, its sounds softened by the height and the greenery. Boats traced calm lines along the river. The bridges pulsed with predictable patterns. Birds wheeled in arcs above the towers, their flight paths resembling the quadrant's gentle curves. Miko gestured toward the seedlings. By tomorrow, a second set of leaves should appear. The pattern will begin to echo itself. Harper smiled faintly. Patterns within patterns. As in the sky, so in the soil. As in the past, so in the present. They remained in the alcove, letting the tea cool slowly, neither rushing nor counting the time. Afternoon light shifted across the greenhouse floor, lines of brightness interrupted by the shapes of leaves and the narrow frames of the glass walls. Shadows lengthened imperceptibly. The cat moved at last, leaping down and pacing toward the planter. It sat, tail curled around its paws, facing the seedlings as though standing witness. Miko set the empty cup aside and folded their hands in their lap. The first alignment was only the beginning. You've seen that now. Harper nodded. They had felt it not just in the drawing of lines, but in the living responses of the seedlings, in the dreams that came unbidden and lingered past waking. The quadrant's shape was not a conclusion. It was a framework, one that would expand and shift with each passing day, just as the roots would stretch deeper and the leaves would tilt toward the changing arc of the sun. The cycle was ongoing. Harper breathed in the rich, warm air of the greenhouse, the quiet surrounding them steady and sure. Their own breath had begun to mirror the greenhouse's pulse, the rhythms of growth, observation, and silent understanding. The constellation was alive, not above them alone, but beneath them too, in the soil, in the stems and leaves, in the spaces between words and thoughts, and it would keep breathing long after the moment had passed. The afternoon matured into a soft, steady brightness. The greenhouse remained a sanctuary wrapped in light and green. Outside, the city moved with a quiet rhythm, distant and softened by the altitude. Harper sat at the edge of the planter, while Miko continued their observations with calm precision. The seedlings responded to the day's slow arc, leaves adjusting their angle imperceptibly as the sun's position shifted. The air inside the greenhouse smelled of damp soil, rosemary, and the sweet perfume of the blooming jasmine. The cat lay stretched along the work table, silver eyes narrowed against the sunlight, occasionally flicking its tail in response to the rustling grasses outside. Harper traced one fingertip lightly along the soil's surface, feeling the faint tremble of life beneath. Roots pressing downward into the rich earth, anchoring growth that was both physical and symbolic. These plants were not only biological forms, but silent participants in a larger dialogue. The living expression of the quadrant now embedded both in sky and soil. Miko paused in writing and closed their notebook. They joined Harper at the planter, kneeling with the slow grace of habit and long practice. They placed their palm flat against the earth beside Harper's. No words passed between them. None were necessary. The gesture itself acknowledged what both already understood. The seedlings had passed beyond mere care. They were now co-creators in the unfolding pattern. The shadows of the greenhouse structure stretched longer as the sun tilted westward. On the stone floor, the frame's lines intersected in new shapes, forming an evolving geometry that shifted hour by hour. Harper watched the light change and reflected on how the quadrant's lines had first seemed like barriers, fixed, rigid paths drawn by a hand now stilled by time. But they had never been walls. They were invitations, guides, tracing potential growth that could change with each observer, each participant. Just as the leaves grew not in straight lines, but in curves shaped by light, water, and unseen rhythms beneath the earth. The cat stirred and moved to sit beside the planter, mirroring Harper and Miko. Its gaze followed the shifting shadows. Harper imagined for a moment that the cat could see the quadrant's shape even in the daylight, sensing the convergence of patterns humans needed charts to detect. Miko finally broke the silence, voice quiet and even. The second alignment will not need lines drawn in ink. Harper nodded. The first mapping had been necessary to bridge the past and the present, to make sense of inherited mystery. But now, the constellation lived beyond vellum and journal. It had moved into the realm of growth, memory, and shared attention. They stood together, stepping back to observe the planter as a whole. The leaves caught the changing light, shadows falling across their delicate surfaces in patterns that seemed at once random and inevitable. The growth of the seedlings had become not a project to be measured, but a rhythm to accompany, like the rise and fall of breath. Miko turned toward the observatory alcove and returned with the acetate overlays they had used in earlier observations. They held them loosely, almost absently. We'll continue to record changes, not to confine the growth, but to witness it, to remember. Harper agreed. Recording was not about control. It was about acknowledgement, a way of honoring the ongoing relationship between the visible and the invisible, the rooted and the celestial. They replaced the overlays on the work table, letting them rest beside the closed atlas and the transparent sheets already marked with the first notes of the cycle. Nothing more was added for now. The moment did not require documentation. The cat leapt onto the table once more, circling the overlays before settling atop them. A silent statement that the present moment mattered more than the written record. The light shifted again, deepening into the richer gold of late afternoon. Harper crossed to the greenhouse door and looked out across the rooftop. The city had begun its quiet transition toward evening. The river held longer shadows, and the traffic's rhythm had slowed to a gentler pulse. Above, the quadrant stars remained hidden behind daylight's veil, but Harper sensed their presence with the same certainty they felt the seedlings' roots below. Patterns continued, unseen but steady. They returned to the planter and stood beside Miko. The seedlings moved slightly in the breeze flowing through the open greenhouse door. Not random motion, a response. Harper rested one hand lightly on the planter's rim. "We'll observe tomorrow." Miko nodded, and the next day, and the next. The cycle was not a series of tasks to complete. It was a tide to follow, a current flowing beneath and beyond the passage of hours. The greenhouse exhaled warmth and green scent. The cat closed its eyes. The quadrant lived. The light mellowed into a deep gold, washing the greenhouse in a quiet glow. The heat of the day softened, replaced by the gentler warmth that signaled the coming of evening. Shadows lengthened across the floor, the thin lines of the greenhouse's frame stretching like fingers toward the planter where the seedlings rested. Harper and Miko moved without speaking, their actions practiced now, part of the unfolding rhythm they had both accepted. The acetate overlays were returned to their drawer. The notebook was closed. The telescope remained covered, not because it was forgotten, but because its purpose had shifted. The sky did not need to be charted tonight. It needed to be witnessed. The cat stirred from its place on the table and padded toward the doorway, pausing to look back as though confirming it was time. Harper followed, Miko close behind. They stepped out onto the rooftop. The air had cooled slightly, the breeze carrying with it the scent of water from the river far below. The noise of the city had softened, a lower, steadier hum as the daytime rush settled into evening pace. Boats moved slowly along the river's curve. Lights blinked on in the windows of distant towers, each one a small signal of continuity. The crescent planters lined the rooftops' edges, their grasses swaying gently. The first few stars had begun to reveal themselves in the deepening sky, faint pinpricks of light in the blank quadrant that no longer felt blank at all. Harper moved to the low table near the observatory alcove where the tea set rested. They filled the kettle and set it to warm, the quiet hiss of heating water, a familiar soothing sound. Miko gathered fresh mint and a few sprigs of lemon balm from a small planter near the greenhouse door. As the water boiled, they added the herbs to 2 simple cups. The rising steam carried the scent of earth and citrus into the cool evening air. The cat leapt onto a nearby bench and settled into a tight curl, tail wrapped around its paws. Harper handed a cup to Miko, and together they stood facing the sky. The quadrant overhead grew clearer as the last of daylight faded. The stars appeared not as fixed points, but as quiet presences responding to the unseen patterns of the world below. The seedlings in the planter, though small, seemed to echo the constellations, their leaves tilted toward the sky as if in recognition. Harper sipped the tea slowly, the warmth grounding them in the moment. This was no longer the urgency of discovery or the sharp anticipation of a solved mystery. It was the gentle continuity of tending, of witnessing, of participating in cycles larger than themselves. Miko spoke softly. They'll grow through the season, and when the time comes, they'll seed new patterns. Harper nodded. The living constellation was not a singular event. It was an evolving conversation between generations, between sky and soil, between those who charted and those who cared for what was found. The river reflected the early stars, the bridges casting long shadows across the water's surface. The cat blinked slowly, eyes reflecting the faint light overhead. They remained in companionable silence, allowing the days close to unfold without the weight of words. The tea cooled in their hands. The stars brightened. The seedlings rested. The living constellation breathed quietly, held not only in ink and paper, not only in the frames of telescopes or the boundaries of charts, but in the simple, persistent act of returning to observe, returning to care, returning to listen. Harper let their breath slow, syncing with the larger rhythm, no longer seeking conclusions, simply becoming part of the ongoing cycle. As the first breeze of true night stirred the leaves and grasses, Harper and Miko lifted their eyes to the sky together. The quadrant had changed. They had changed. The pattern continued. Night gathered fully, the last blush of twilight fading beyond the towers. The rooftop garden settled into quiet. The breeze softened into stillness. The grasses ceased their swaying, leaves paused in their upward reach. The greenhouse glowed faintly behind Harper and Miko, its warm interior light muted by the glass, casting gentle patterns across the stone path. The cat remained at its perch, watching without urgency. The tea had cooled. The cups rested on the low table, forgotten in the stillness that had become more nourishing than any drink or conversation. Above, the sky stretched vast and calm. The quadrant was no longer just a diagram in Harper's mind. It was not even just a pattern traced in the stars. It had become a breathing presence shared between the leaves, the soil, the sky, and the simple acts of witnessing and tending. The stars held their positions with quiet confidence. The living constellation was not fixed. It responded, shifted, waited, like the seedlings at their feet. Harper glanced toward the planter. The seedlings were silhouettes now, their delicate forms dark against the faint shimmer of glass and sky. Yet even without light, Harper sensed their growth. The slight changes in posture, the tiny adjustments to the breeze, the deepening of roots unseen. Miko stood with arms crossed loosely, face lifted toward the stars. "Tomorrow, the second leaves may open," they said quietly. Not as an announcement, as a simple truth. Harper nodded. The cycle would continue, not because of their will, but because it was its nature. Their role was not to command it, but to accompany it. The cat leapt down and padded toward the planter. It circled once, then sat, facing the sky as if standing vigil. Harper smiled faintly and reached down to brush fingers across the planter's rim, the wood cool under their touch. The river below reflected the steady flow of lights from the bridges and towers. Traffic's hum had softened further, the pace of the world outside slowing in tandem with the rising of the stars. Miko spoke again, softer still. "We'll meet here in the morning. The quadrant will be different by then, as it always is." Harper agreed. The pattern would not be static, nor would they. With a final glance at the seedlings and the sky, Harper gathered the empty cups. They returned them to the alcove inside the greenhouse, the scent of mint and lemon balm still lingering faintly. The cat remained outside, unmoving. Miko lingered beside the planter. Harper returned to the doorway and paused, taking in the quiet scene. Not to memorize it, but to acknowledge it as a moment within the cycle. One layer among many. "Until morning," Miko said. Harper nodded. No further words. The understanding had already been spoken in the shared hours of tending, drawing, observing. They crossed the rooftop slowly, feeling the cool stone beneath their feet. The elevator's arrival broke the hush only slightly. The cat flicked its tail but did not move. The stars held their places. The seedlings rested in their slow, steady growth. As the elevator doors closed, Harper took one last look at the greenhouse glowing softly behind them. The quadrant overhead shimmered faintly in the deep blue sky. Patterns shifted. Cycles continued. The living constellation breathed,